I'm going to ask you to briefly introduce yourself to our listeners, even though I have painted a rough picture of who Sanelisiwe is. But if you could just briefly introduce, and then we'll get to our conversation for this evening.
Thank you so much. My name is Sanelisiwe Gade is my surname. Currently residing in Cape Town, but I am from the Eastern Cape originally. Studied law at the University of the Western Cape, and I have been working in the legal field since the year 2018. Worked, of course, in different law firms, and I am now currently working for myself at S Gade Attorneys. I'm the director of my own firm now. So, in a nutshell, that's who I am.
Congratulations. Beautiful, beautiful. Just the way you've gone up in your field. It's really inspiring. And I think many others can look up to you and say, wow, if she can, then so can we. So, Sanelisiwe, there were events in the history of our country, that led to the commemoration of today, 21st of March, Human Rights Day. Some people understand why we commemorate this day. Some people don't quite really get it, they just think, oh, wow, it's another holiday. I can just be at home and spend time with the family. So, what are those events that led to us commemorating 21 March?
Oh, okay. I think just as a point of departure, we must be mindful and remember that our country was once a state where humans were not treated the same. Humans were treated differently depending on their ethnicity or race, as well as their sex or gender. So it became evident that there needs to be an uprising. So there were a series of marches that took place prior 1994. Part of which, of course, which is the most well known, is the Sharpeville massacre. One of the people that were pioneering that movement at the time was the late Robert Sobukwe, who led the different types of marches. At that time, of course, they were marching against the use of pass laws. At that time in our country, if you were a Black person, you had to carry what was formerly known as a dompas, this piece of paper that identified who you are everywhere you go. And if you are found without this pass, you would be arrested. And this was not how the non-Black people were treated. So it became evident that South Africa is in need of change, and all people are deserving to go where they want to go without having to carry permits and to live as other people live. And so 21 March is now here to commemorate the people that died, in particular at Sharpeville. I think it was about 69 people who died protesting against the Dompas regime at that time in our country.
Sure. Those were, hard times. We've come a long way as a country, and we're here now. And we have this democracy that, we are all participating in as citizens of the country. Now, within that democracy, what are human rights? And if you could explain it in the most simplest form for us to understand, what are human rights? When someone speaks to us about this is my human right, or these are your human rights, you should do something about whatever has happened. What does that mean?
Human rights literally means the privileges that all people are meant to enjoy simply by virtue of being human. Perhaps differently put, the rights of humans is the ability of humans to be human. It's supposed to be those so-called privileges that all people must enjoy,
mm,
regardless of their color of their skin, regardless of the language that they speak, regardless of the religion that they practice, but by virtue of being human, by virtue of being birthed through a woman, you are human.
mm,
And whatever the definition is of human, then these are the things that you are supposed to have.
good.
Nobody is supposed to be able to give them to you. I think that is the point of departure. The point of departure, human rights are those things that nobody is supposed to be giving them to you. They are not a gift to you. But by virtue of you being alive, this is what belongs to you.
Sure. Powerful. Now, what purpose does human rights serve a country? So obviously, each country would have a list of their human rights, and what purpose does that serve in a country, and then maybe in the bigger scheme of things in the world as well.
You see, the most painful and unfortunate thing, right, is that across the world, there have been gross human rights violations across the world in different centuries. People were treated differently depending on the type of country. In some countries, there would be genocides where people of a certain race are killed or they're taken up as slaves. They're all black, but because of their language, that race of people would be ill-treated and mistreated. In other countries, it would be women. They're all of the same race, but because they're women, they are being mistreated. So the purpose of human rights and the purpose of them being actually enshrined and written and recorded in law is to ensure that the errors of the past don't take place again. We have human rights written down now so that we ensure that what the apartheid regime did is not done in the dispensation of democracy. So that is the main and primary reason why human rights are written down. They are supposed to be inherent. Again, I would like to echo this again. It's the type of things that each and every person is supposed to just automatically think that if I want to be treated in this manner, then I ought to treat the next person in that manner. The same thing that is due to me and what I feel I deserve, that is the same respect and courtesy that the next person should also deserve, whether it is in the workplace, whether it is in the economy, whether it is in business, whether it is in academia, each and every area of our lives, we are supposed to be enjoying rights the same way. And that is why they're written down currently, because they have not always been enjoyed by all and in the equal amount.
Sure. Now, within human rights, different groups have different rights. So, for example, you'll have children's rights, women's rights. What are those human rights that we have in South Africa? But firstly, why do we have different groupings for rights of children and women?
You find that in the history of South Africa, there was categorization of people. There were the whites and then there were non-whites. There were jobs that the whites and non-whites did differently, the type of careers that non-whites could not do. And then within the non-white category still, there was jobs that the male and the woman could not do. So the men usually would get the better type of jobs. Even when they're doing the same type of job, ordinarily they'd be getting higher and better payment and salaries. So what the now dispensation has done is so as to try and bring balance back into the country. They have now given rights specifically to the people who were previously marginalized, so as to try and balance back the scales. So there's rights specifically for the different segments of groups, because these are the segments and groups that were previously disadvantaged. Another practical reason for, in particular, children's rights is you'll find that children, by virtue of being children, do not all have the right opportunities and platforms to speak, one, and two, do not yet have capacity to speak for themselves. So the Bill of Rights is there so as to ensure that children are protected regardless of whether or not their parents desire to fight for them or not. So regardless of whether this parent is present, regardless of whether or not this parent is loving of this child, but this child has the right to certain benefits. And so it's there to safeguard children. It's there to safeguard the different categories of people, regardless of whether or not people want to do for these groups of people what is due to them.
But having them there is what it means to be in a democratic state, and in a state that cares for their people. So the human rights that we have in South Africa, we find in the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
So for someone that doesn't understand their rights, you would recommend they do what?
So we have, fortunately for us, the Constitution on the internet. So all you have to do literally is to just download the Constitution onto your phone if you have a smartphone. And in there you'll find the Bill of Rights. Chapter 2 is where you find the Bill of Rights. And you can just take a read and you'll see the different rights that you have by virtue of being human. Other things that, of course, one can do is to engage in conversations such as these, listen to the radio when these topics are brought up, because many times we shy away from these types of conversations because some people would consider them to be boring. But part of the main reasons why we continue to struggle as a nation is because we are ill-informed, and not because information is not out there, but because we seek out entertainment as opposed to information. So in order for you to be informed, the internet has almost everything.
Use it to your benefit, educate yourself. If you're listening out there and you want to take an opportunity at understanding what your rights are, you can do so. As Sanelisiwe has mentioned, that go to the internet, search for the Constitution of South Africa. The Bill of Rights is in chapter 2. She has explained this to us. So download it and read and get to know what your rights are, in order for you to know when your rights are being violated. Sanelisiwe, and what are some of the misconceptions that exist pertaining to human rights? The things that we thought maybe were true but actually are not. Can you take us through some of those?
Definitely. I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that if you have a right, then it cannot be limited or taken away. I think a very easy example is the right to freedom of movement. You have a right to freedom of movement, yes, but that does not mean you have the right to trespass onto people's properties. So with every right, there is a responsibility. Despite having the right to go wherever you want to go, you don't have that right does not make it right for you to infringe on other people's rights, because the other person has the right to privacy as well. So with every right is a responsibility. We must act responsibly with the rights that we have. So that is one of the biggest misconceptions. People think that because they have the right to freedom of speech, that they can say whatever they want to say and to whomever they want to say it to. Fortunately, there are consequences to saying things that are not right. If, for example, you decide that you want to swear at somebody, you have a right to freedom of speech. At the end of the day, you can say whatever you want to say. But if that person's dignity is impaired by virtue of what you have said, that person also has the right to institute against you criminal actions.
Sure.
On a charge of criminal injuria, because you have sworn at them to the extent that their dignity was impaired. So every right has a responsibility. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Constitution, it's Section 36, speaks of limitations. Rights can be limited. You have a right to freedom. But if you, for some reason, are suspected of having committed a criminal offense, that right to freedom can be limited. And what that means is that you can be put in jail because the state is of the view that you have committed an offense, of course, pending bail applications and. But because you have a right to liberty does not mean that it cannot be limited.
Sure.
Another particular example was during the time of COVID-19, and we saw a lot of fights during the COVID-19 pandemic. People saying, I have a right to move and go wherever I want to go. But the law of general application that has been given out by the country, by the president, who's saying right now your movements have to be restricted. You cannot leave your house after this time. This is the time where you have to stay at home. And people were struggling to accept that there is a president who is telling them when and when not to come and go into their homes. So the biggest misconception, I think, when it comes to rights is that they are absolute and that they cannot be limited and that they have no responsibilities.
With every right, there is a responsibility, family, as Sanelisiwe is still having a conversation with us here at 79 Radio K Pulpit. Joining the conversation, do you have any questions? 0817291657 that you'd like to ask about rights, things that maybe confuse you along the way and you've always wanted to ask. This is a great opportunity for you to do so. Now, how does one know that their rights have been violated or infringed upon? I know that you've made some examples, but, how do I know? And thereafter, what steps should I take once I know that, you know what, I've been violated here. My rights have been violated.
The beautiful thing about human rights, right, is that as human beings, most of the time you have a sense and feeling about these things when you are feeling uneasy. Like the right of dignity, for example. At times you cannot really put a finger on it, but sometimes what a person has said to you makes you feel so uneasy that you just can't stand that environment. Rights such as rights in the workplace, for example. Sometimes your employer has not explicitly said to you, in order for you to get that promotion, you need to sleep with me. They might simply hint at it or say things that make you feel uneasy. And so because sometimes the infringement of human rights is not as clear-cut as a person smacking you across the face, which is an infringement to your right to bodily integrity. You are then meant to approach the either court or forum that deals with that type of infringement in particular. I think better put is to say, depending on where the infringement took place, and what the nature of the infringement is, then that is going to inform you of which platform you must go to address the issue. So if, for example, you are fired because you're pregnant, then you need to take that to the CCMA or to the labor courts. If, for example, you are not being hired at a particular job because you are not Black, that again because that falls under the Labor Department. These are things that will be dealt with in the Labor Department. If you are not hired at work because you are Christian and they don't want Christians in that type of work, again, your freedom of religion here is being infringed. You would approach, again, the CCMA, because now this is an infringement, yes, of your human rights, but it can be dealt directly with by the CCMA or the labor court. If, for example, somebody sexually assaults you, somebody swears, these are rights that, when infringed, constitute criminal offenses. If a person infringes on your right to privacy, they enter into your house, they break into your home. These type of infringements at times can constitute criminal offenses, and you have the right to go and lay charge against these people in the criminal courts. And then there are other rights that, when infringed, you would need to either approach different forums such as the Human Rights Commission, and those could be anything from perhaps the state is not wanting to give you a house. You've been on the waiting list for 40 years and you feel that, no, your name has been shifted up and down and you don't understand why this is going on. You have a right to housing. So now there you are seeing that it's not because of your religion, it's not because of any type of act that you have committed. So there's you can't exactly trace where else you can go. Then, in a particular instance, I would suggest that you go to the Human Rights Commission, and they would be in a position to help you. Alternatively, always, if you are not certain about the correct place to go to, each area has magistrates' courts. You go to the magistrates' court and you ask to speak to one of the clerks, and you tell them, this is my problem, and they will direct you. They will tell you, this type of problem, you need to go to the Master of the High Court, you need to go to the Legal Practice Council, you need to go to the Human Rights Commission, you need to go to legal aid, because the different types of infringements are dealt with at different courts. There is essentially not a one-size-fits-all approach. All infringements are not dealt with under one statute or laws or fora.
So each infringement has its own, place where you need to go. But yours is to find out, what this infringement, where to from here, and for that you can go to the magistrate court, where they will then lead you where to go. Now, an infringement has happened and I feel that, I've been violated. How is my dignity restored, and whose responsibility is it to restore dignity? Any human being's dignity.
Part of the reasons why courts were enacted and created, was so as to ensure that the person who was infringed gets the sense of justice. When somebody steals your television, when somebody breaks into your home, when somebody hits you, when somebody sexually violates you, you want to see that person punished for their actions, or in the alternative, held to account. And so the different types of courts are there so as to adjudicate on these matters, and decisions would be made, and punishment will be given, or verdict will be given. So one's dignity is then restored, in the essence that in these courts, most of the time, conversations will be held between whoever is adjudicating the matter and you, the person who has come to report this case, and you'll be asked, what do you want to see here? If a person in the workplace has been bullying you, has been mistreating you, if a person or child at school has been bullying you, you are asked in the adjudication process, what is it that you want to say? And you'll say, I want this person to apologize to me. And if they apologize to me, I feel that I will be well and my dignity will be restored. I want this person to make a public apology. I want this person to pay back my money. I want this person to be taken into prison. And what you feel must happen to the person who has infringed upon your dignity, or whatever right it is that has been infringed upon, the adjudicator will take into account what it is that you want to see being done. And at the finalization of that matter, one can only hope that your dignity will be restored. Unfortunately, there is no one size fit all, because dignity is so different to so many different people. It's personal. I can say a word to you that you won't care about, but if I say the exact same word to your coworker, that will shatter them and break them down. And so how they feel their dignity is restored will be totally different to how you feel your dignity is restored. One person will say, I don't want this person to be arrested. I just want them to make a public apology. Tell everybody that I did not do what she said I did. You publicly humiliated me by lying about me in this manner. Now make public proclamation that I did not do this. And by so doing, then my dignity will be restored. And so it entirely depends on the current circumstances. The merit of each and every case is going to determine how that matter is going to be finalized.
Absolutely. Yeah, makes perfect sense. Now, how can we begin as citizens to foster an environment where citizens are empowered about their human rights? They know exactly, that right here I'm being violated. I need to report this. I need to go there, to this court in order for me to get the justice that I need and my dignity to be restored.
It goes again back to information. Information is power. Information is power. There are things as simple as, I'm just going to make a practical example now. We have people that are unaware that the Department of Housing have things called FLISP applications. These are subsidy applications for people who are first-time.
Yeah.
There are thousands of people who are unaware that they are living in a squatter camp right now, earning in the threshold that the Department of Housing is saying, if you're earning in this threshold, you can qualify for a house and we will subsidize you for buying of such house. Now, when you don't know, unfortunately, you are going to continue living a life that is subpar and substandard. We are deserving of so much better, again, by virtue of being human. And if you only took the time to just learn what is it that I am deserving of, from infringements in the workplaces, people are not aware of the type of contracts that they should and should not enter into, because people want to have these type of conversations. Every year there are human rights seminars across our cities, and every year you'd find little to no people attending these sessions because people don't really care for information. And I've been saying this, unfortunately this is the first time I'm saying this to you, but we need to grow as a generation living in a democratic republic to care for ourselves enough to understand that the South Africa as it is right now was not always as it is right now. So the injustices of our parents are not our injustices. Our parents could not even apply to be lawyers. It was not allowed for them to be lawyers. But in our dispensation, we can apply to be lawyers, but we've got issues where in the application to be a lawyer, the job or the employer, the job description says you need to be fluent in Afrikaans and you need to have your own motor vehicle. This is an injustice and this is an infringement to my rights, because now I cannot apply for this type of job simply because I don't speak Afrikaans and simply because I don't have my own vehicle. Now, nations are being held about these issues, but young people in particular are not part of these sittings and conversations so that they can learn. When an employer has called you for an interview and has told you, you meet all the requirements, but unfortunately, because we don't speak Afrikaans, I am not going to be able to do this job. Now, you have heard this happening to you. if you were a person who was part of the conversations relating to human rights, you would know that that sounds fishy and something is wrong with that. And you would know automatically, okay, I listened to the radio last week and they said, when this happens, I need to approach the CCMA. And you'd know exactly to go there. So there is not one site where you can go and just download all the information. We need to be a people who are consistently seeking out information so that consistently you know with new types of infringements, we know there is ways to deal with them.
Sure. You need to empower yourself, go out there and find out. How can the rule of law be used as a vehicle for inclusion and emancipation? I know that you've alluded to it in the previous answer, but if you could just elaborate a little bit.
The most beautiful thing about our constitution is that it is so inclusive. It tells us that we are all the same. So on paper, we are all the same. Now, unfortunately, what is on paper cannot be enjoyed without people taking action.
Yeah.
So in order for the rule of the law to be applied, people must approach the courts for remedy. Every time something happens that you know is an infringement to your rights, don't keep quiet about it. There are people being evicted from their homes, and there's laws that speaks about the right way to evict. You just can't be chased out of your home because the landlord has now decided they no longer want you there. You have a right to housing, and there's laws that tell you how you must be evicted. So unfortunately, again, it goes back to information. The law is written down on paper. The law is constantly evolving. I think this is another thing that's very important for us. Law evolves because the law as it was pre-1994 is not as it is right now. There was once a time in our country where the death penalty was lawful. It was lawful for a person to be put to death for committing a crime. It is no longer lawful now because there are people, but something is wrong with this. A person has a right to life, and that right should never be limited. And if nobody had taken this to the courts, that law would never have changed. And there's so many examples that we can look at. The fact is, for as long as we are quiet and we do not challenge issues, they are going to be left the same. The law is changing in accordance to what we consider to be right. And we can look even at the rules on corporal punishment in our schools. There were times where there was nothing wrong with a child being beaten at school. But now there's everything wrong with that because there were people who said, but our children are being mistreated in schools. Teachers are taking the cane and beating our children until they are blue. And it is not right. And because people stood up and spoke about this, the law had to be changed accordingly. So law changes when we approach the courts and say, something is wrong here. This is not right. Another last example. In our criminal courts now, the law has changed to the extent that if you're arrested on an allegation of domestic violence, before you are even considered for bail, the state prosecutor needs to call the complainant to confirm whether or not they feel that this person should be released. And this is happening because somebody said it is not right how high the levels of domestic violence are in our land. Something must be done about it. They approach the courts and the courts listen. So law evolves depending on how and when we take issues to the courts for adjudication.
Yeah, be an active citizen. Raise your voice, use your voice, and use your human rights. Ultimately, like you said in the beginning, Sanelisiwe, that it is a privilege that by virtue of you being human, you have human rights. Sanelisiwe, for those that are interested in using your services, maybe you can just list your services for us quickly, and then let us know where we can reach you, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Okay. So I specialize mostly in criminal bail applications. I do personal injury law, which is in particular road accident fund claims.
Mm.
I do civil procedure, general litigation, divorce, family law, maintenance. And I can be reached on Facebook. On Facebook, I am S Gade Attorneys. And I have a WhatsApp number. You can text and you can call on 068 656 0621. Again, that's 068 656 0621.
Mm. We've got some commentary here. Thank you so much for sharing that information with us, Sanelisiwe. We've got commentary from Musa Jaguja that's saying, what a powerful and informative session. It's sometimes the fear to openly speak about your situation that then holds you back from or being afraid of being fired. So, you pretty much just go with what's being done, even though maybe you might know and you might have a hint that, yeah, there's something wrong. We are being violated. And she also further says people are afraid of being mistreated after they speak up or fight for other people's rights. And then she says, thank you so much, Sanelisiwe, for an informative session. I think as you've mentioned, Sanelisiwe, the fear needs to go away. We need to stand up and use the voices that we've been given.
Can I just say one thing lastly? So sorry.
Yes.
Um, we need to learn the correct platforms to discuss these type of things. If you see in the community that a child is being sexually assaulted or molested, yours might not be to go to that family and say, stop what you're doing, because then you might find yourself being ill-treated in that same community. If you see people selling drugs in the community, yours is not to go to that house to say, stop selling drugs, but yours is to report to the police, to the social workers, that I am seeing an injustice taking place here. We must be subtle at times in our approach so as to ensure that in the protection and advancement of the human rights of others, we don't endanger ourselves. Unfortunately, these are tough times that we're living in. If in the workplace you know that you are being ill treated, you don't just go to your employer and say, stop what you're doing to me. You engage HR first to say, look, I have this question. Hypothetically speaking, if there was something of this nature happening, what would be the approach that I should take?
Yeah.
You become tactful, you learn the processes, and then you approach. Before you even go to HR, sometimes you decide, okay, let me go to the CCMA and inquire. CCMA, this thing that is happening, what is the correct approach that I must follow? And they'll tell you this is the correct approach that you must follow, and that is how you're able to move forward. And lastly, lawyers are here to help you. Legal aid is free of charge. The Human Rights Commission is free of charge. The Legal Practice Council is free of charge. Every court is free of charge. Information is there and it's free of charge.
It's all there. It's all about you empowering yourself. Sanelisiwe did mention that information is power. So go out there, be informed, and be a powerful force. Use your voice. Oh, Sanelisiwe has left the building because of our Zoom time. But you all heard her. She has already mentioned that you can reach her on the various platforms that she did mention. And thank you so much, Sanelisiwe. May the Lord bless the work of